All right. So as I mentioned, my name is Amy Soddy. Now I am the Higher Education Access Partner for FIA. For those of you who do not know, FIA is the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, and they award state grants to eligible students. So I work for FIA and I cover all of Allegheny County, so the entire Pittsburgh region. So if you have questions, concerns, anything that you need, you can definitely reach out to me. So both my phone number and my email address are on the screen. Feel free, save that information. Like I said, I will send out a recording and the presentation slides to you, so you'll have my email address, but if you prefer, you can call me or text me with any questions that you have. So today we're going to be going over Financial Aid 101, so all things financial aid. And I understand that this is, can be a difficult process or a confusing process, so I'm here to try to make it a little bit more simple for everyone. So first things first, what is financial aid, right? Well, financial aid consists of funds provided to students and families to help pay for post-secondary education expenses. Now, help is italicized, and there is a very important reason for that. Rarely does financial aid ever cover the full cost to attend higher education. I think that's a misconception that people have, is that, oh, well, I'll have financial aid, I'll be good to go, and they don't really start planning until it's too late. So it's awesome that you're all joining today, because this is the perfect time to get started, to start thinking about how you're going to afford higher education. And not just for the first year, but for 4 or 5 years or whatever it takes until you graduate. So financially, right, there's 3 main types. The first being gift aid. I like to call that our free money. That would be grants and scholarships, and that's money that doesn't have to be paid back. The second, self-help. So that would be our work study programs, our savings accounts, or 529 plans, etc. I like to call that earned money, because you are earning that money whether you're doing a work study program or you've earned that money and put that aside for savings. And then the last are loans. Loans are borrowed money. So if you see anything that has the word loans in it, that is money that's going to have to be paid back in the future. Now, where does all of this money come from? Okay, well, there are some, funding sources, the main one being the federal government. So we see most of the financial aid coming from the federal government, and they have programs like the Pell Grant, federal work study, federal student loans, Parent Plus loans, and more. Then there is the state government. So here at FIA, like I said, we award state grants and other special programs to students that qualify, and we'll be talking about all of those in more detail. We also, through FIA, started, it's fairly new, our own private alternative loan. It's called PA Forward, and I'll talk about that as well. Financial aid also comes from the school or college that you're applying for. So they might offer you an institutional scholarship, a grant, or they might even have their own institutional loan. And then scholarships. Scholarships come from so many different sources, so it's, a wide variety of sources where scholarships can come from. Businesses, organizations, companies, etc. might offer scholarships to students. Now, if I had to simplify financial aid into 5 steps to make it easy, right, I would simplify them into these 5 steps, and this is what we'll be going over today in much, much more detail, all right? So step 1, look for free money first. That is super important to start looking for that free money. Step 2, know your specific deadlines, especially when it comes to free money. A lot of those scholarships and grants have deadlines that you need to make sure you're meeting in order to receive that financial aid. So it's really important to know what those deadlines are, and of course, make sure that you meet those deadlines. Step 3, fill out the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. We'll talk a lot about the FAFSA. And then step 4, compare schools' financial aid offers carefully. There is no specific format for these offer letters that you're going to receive from schools, so it's important to start comparing them and comparing them equally, totally understanding what each thing with those financial aid offers includes, right? Is it a grant? Is it money that has to be paid back, etc.? And I'll share some good questions that you should be asking as you look over those financial aid offers. And then step 5, be sure you have the money you need. Like I said, not just for the first year. It's great that you can get through the first year, but we don't want to see you stretching your budget, maxing out everything you can in order to, get through the first year, only for the second year to approach very quickly, and then you have no idea what you're going to do for that second year. I have seen it happen. It's very unfortunate when it does. And so if we can avoid that, that is our goal. Okay. So we'll jump right into the steps. Steps 1, look for free money first. Now, this is all about, right now, I'm going to talk all about scholarships. Now, it is never too early to start looking for scholarships. It may be too early to apply, but you can start looking around, maybe, students, check with your friends, family members, cousins, whatever it might be. See what scholarships they've applied for, if they've received any scholarships. Other students, check and see what scholarships are out there that people are getting. It's really important at this point to use your networks. I think a lot of the scholarships students receive is because they knew someone who received the scholarship, so they knew to apply. Or maybe a parent worked for an organization or a company that offers scholarships. Maybe you as the student work for someone who offers scholarships. I've seen students get scholarships through, McDonald's, Chipotle, UPS, etc. So maybe your employer is going to offer scholarships. With that as well, if you don't receive one your first year, don't, throw in the towel. Don't say, well, that's it, I'm done, I'm not searching anymore. No, there are scholarships specifically out there for sophomores, for juniors, for seniors, etc. So there's tons of scholarships that you won't even qualify for right now as you start applying. So if you notice, oh, that seems like a really good scholarship, that might be something, I have to be a sophomore to apply for it. That might be something for next year. Keep track of those. Write those down. Because just because you don't get one your first year doesn't mean you can't get one, after that. So definitely don't give up. Keep searching all 4 years, 5 years, whatever it takes. And don't ignore scholarships with smaller amounts. So I know students sometimes come in and they talk to me and they're like, Amy, scholarship is $200. Like, there's no point in applying. Guess what? If you get that scholarship, that is $200 less that you have to pay, $200 that you can save. It's worth it. If it takes you an hour to apply for that and you get a $200 scholarship, where else are you going to make $200 in 1 hour? I certainly don't make that much. So again, take the time and start applying. Now with scholarships and some other things like grants, like I said, there comes deadlines. Deadlines are super important, especially if you're a procrastinator like me. Well, then you might think in the back of your head, oh, I know when that deadline is, I'll get to it. Well, then it comes around and you realize that with that application, you also need transcripts or letters of recommendation or a list of all the activities you're involved with. And now you run out of time because you don't have time to get all those materials. So not only should you know the deadlines, but you also need to know everything that is needed to be submitted with that application, right? I can't stress that enough. And one thing that I do recommend for all my families is if you can, or if you like this, you can do it on Excel or you can put it on a piece of paper, but keep track of all the scholarships that you see and that you apply for. What are the deadlines? How much is the scholarship for? What's required for you to submit? When are they going to notify recipients if you receive the scholarship? It's an awesome tracker, and like I said, you can have a whole section on there for scholarships that you see that you might be able to apply for in the future as well. That way you don't waste any time. Now, the admissions offices have deadlines, especially for the schools you're applying for. They might have early decision deadlines. They may have scholarship deadlines, etc. So make sure you understand all of the deadlines that the schools have. There also might be scholarship deadlines, like I said, for outside scholarships, institutional scholarships, etc. And then the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, actually becomes available for seniors or parents of seniors starting October 1st. So if you're a senior, you can actually start the FAFSA this week for next fall. So you would be completing the 21-22 FAFSA. Okay, so I have had parents who go on and they're like, oh, Amy, I already completed it. And I'm like, no, it's not out there yet. So they completed the one that's out there, which is the 2021, but that's for the current academic year. So be sure when you go on to complete your FAFSA that you complete the 21-22 FAFSA. Again, like I said, some schools might have a priority deadline of when you have to complete the FAFSA in order to be considered for some types of institutional aid. So it's good to know about that as well. Another deadline too for grants. So for FIA, we offer state grants to students, like I said, and we have a deadline, okay? So you have to submit the FAFSA every year. I know, it's a bummer, but don't worry, it gets easier year after year. You do have to submit the FAFSA every year, and you're going to want to make sure you submit it by May 1st. So if you're planning to enroll in a degree program or a college transferable program at a junior college, you're going to want to make sure you complete the FAFSA every year by May 1st. The only exception is for our first-time students, so all of you, if you're planning to enroll in a community college, a business, trade, technical, hospital, school of nursing, or a 2-year program that's not transferable, then you have until August 1st to complete the FAFSA. Now that would be May and August of 2021, so you have plenty of time to make that deadline. And the August 1st deadline is only for first-year students who are planning to enroll in community college, a business, trade, technical, etc. I do still recommend complete your FAFSA by May 1st every year, even this upcoming year, just so you don't have to worry about in case you change your mind or you decide to attend a different school. That way you know it's done. And honestly, I'm going to suggest all of you, if you can complete it, by the new year. So I typically tell my family, Thanksgiving break is a good time to start completing the FAFSA. Just so that it's done with, and that way you are sure that you're meeting any deadlines that schools are going to require. Now, step 3, FAFSA, right? Making sure you complete the FAFSA. Again, that is the free application for federal student aid. So it's completely free to complete. So if you're on a website that's asking you to put in credit card information, you're not at the right place. It's completely free to complete. And this is not just an application for loans. This applies to students for multiple different federal programs, including federal loans, but also including the federal Pell Grant, federal work study, and some other programs as well. So it's really important to make sure that you're completing the FAFSA application. Even if you don't think you're going to want loans or you might not need loans, whatever the situation is, I still highly recommend everyone complete the FAFSA. At FIA, we also use FAFSA information in order to award state grants. So you have to complete the FAFSA, like I said, with those deadlines in order to receive a state grant. So the FAFSA is much more than just loans. And like I said earlier too, some schools use the FAFSA application for their own institutional aid. I did get a question about PA state grants. We're going to be going over that in a little bit more detail about if you're attending in-state versus out-of-state and how that would work. But we'll get to that a little bit towards the later section after we go through the FAFSA. So the FAFSA, like I said, it's like your first step for financial aid. So it's really important to make sure you're completing the FAFSA. You do have to do it every single year. And every year you can start as early as October 1st. So again, every year I'm going to recommend Thanksgiving break is the perfect time to get it done. That's just, in my mind, the reminder to myself, all right, this is the time when families are starting to do it. And that's usually when schools might start checking the FAFSA applications for next year. Now, in order to start the FAFSA, so something that you can do right now, if you're a senior or a parent of a senior, is to create FSA ID accounts. Now, I know this gets confusing. There's so many different words when it comes to financial aid. There's different dates, there's different years, etc. But what I'm going to explain right now is the FSA ID account is what you use to log into the FAFSA. So the student would have an FSA ID account, and when you go to the FAFSA's website, you would put in that FSA ID account to log into the FAFSA. Parents also need an FSA ID account. At least one parent needs the FSA ID account because after the student completes the FAFSA, parents, you will have to put in your FSA ID account information, and that is how you will electronically sign their FAFSA. So parents, you're not completing a FAFSA. It's the student, the one who's applying for financial aid. That is who would log into the FAFSA application, again, using their FSA ID account. I know it gets confusing. If you have questions, let me know, because I went back and forth with a parent today, and she's like, okay, so we both have to create FAFSA accounts, right? Well, yes, you have to create FSA ID accounts, but the parents are not completing the FAFSA. Think about it as the FAFSA is an application for aid. So only the person applying for aid would complete the FAFSA. All right, so now, right now, seniors or parents of seniors, you could actually go on and you could create the FSA ID accounts. So if you go to fsaid.ed.gov, the student and parent, you can create your accounts. Now, these are totally separate accounts, so they're not linked to each other, okay? You each need your own usernames. You'd create your own passwords. You have to have separate email addresses. You can't use the same email address for multiple accounts. If you have a mobile phone that you receive, text messages through or whatnot, I do suggest linking up your mobile phone. It'll make it a lot easier if you're like me and you always get locked out of accounts because you forget your password. You'll have to answer your own security questions. So at this point, students, parents, make sure that students are answering their own security questions. We don't want you setting up the account for the student and answering the questions as yourself as the parent. So students, you're going to create an account, and parents, you will create an account. You can create them at any time. So I got a question, does a parent have to sign up for their ID after the student creates theirs? No, parents, you could sign up for an account today. Students, you could sign up for one on October 1st. It doesn't matter. There's no order. And the reason, like I said, is because they're not actually linked at all. So those accounts aren't linked. What will happen is once the student creates their FAFSA, at the end of it, the parent will log on and then electronically sign their FAFSA. And that's kind of how it gets linked. That's how they're double checking that you're the parent, etc. You will need social security numbers to complete the FSAID account. Please, 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 please make sure that it's the correct account or social security number. I can't tell you how many times we see students have the wrong social security number entered because that's what they thought it was, or they weren't sure, but they kind of figured it was this. Make sure no matter what that you're entering the correct social security number for both the parent and student. Also for students, I will recommend don't use a high school email address account. Make a personal email address if you don't have one and use that, because you're going to need this account for not just the FAFSA, but for other steps as well. And after you graduate, if your high school email account is terminated or expires after a couple of months or a year, you don't want to get locked out of your account because that email address isn't valid anymore. So make sure you're using a personal email account. If you don't have one, this is the perfect time to create one. So now the parent has their FSAID account, the student has their FSAID account. It's October 1st, and you go to FAFSA.gov. The student would be the one that would log on to the FAFSA, and then you can complete the application. Now, if you want, I think this is a good thing to do, is this little checklist of things that you need to have with you. I think it makes it easier if you have this information right when you're starting the FAFSA. That way you're not halfway through and then you have to go searching for your tax returns, your W-2s, etc. You'll have everything right there ready to go. So when you sit down to complete the FAFSA, it should be pretty easy to do. So like I said, you will need social security numbers, date of birth for the student, of course, parents. You'll need 2019 tax information. So for parents, if you filed taxes in 2019, you'll need your tax returns. Students, if you filed taxes in 2019, you will need your tax return. You will also need W-2s for parents and students from 2019. So FAFSA does use prior tax year information. So what that means is for the 21-22 academic year, you're using 2019 tax information. The following year, so that would be 22-23, you would use 2020 tax information. Yes, each child, if you have multiple children who would be attending college, each child needs their own separate FSAID accounts, and they will each complete their own FAFSA. Okay, so all students need their own FAFSA application, even if they're siblings. They don't use the same one. They have to have their own FAFSA application. The reason is because they're going to list the schools that they're interested in applying to. They're going to list if they had any income and whatnot. That information could be different per child. So yes, each child would be required to create their own FSAID account and then to complete their own FAFSA application. Now, if you do have multiple children in school as the parent, you as the parent would only have one account, and you can sign all of your children's FAFSAs with that account. So if you have 3 children in college, you can sign each one of their FAFSAs with your FSAID account. So parent, you only need one, right? Every person in the financial aid realm needs their own account, if that makes sense. So parents, you have yours, but you can sign multiple FAFSAs. You can only complete one. If, let's say maybe you as a parent are going to school. You can complete a FAFSA application for the schools that you're attending and sign your FAFSA, but your students would also need their own accounts and they would complete their own FAFSA applications. You would also need 2019 untaxed income if you had any. And then another thing, just to make it a little bit even trickier, I know that's a lot, but then you would need asset information for both the parent and student. However, asset information is as of the day you file the FAFSA. So you're not thinking back, oh, what was my asset information in 2019? No, it's as of the day that you're filing the FAFSA. Asset information would be, money in your cash, checkings, savings accounts, if you have any investments, etc. Okay. Yes, we will get to, that's a good question. Someone asked about importing 2019 tax information, if that's possible. It is possible. We'll talk about it in just a few slides. Before you get to financial information, though, so the student will log in to the FAFSA. They're going to be completing the FAFSA, the students themselves. They're going to enter all of their demographic information, and then it will take them to the school selection. Students can list up to 10 schools. They don't have to have applied or be admitted. They can list any 10 schools that they want. If they're interested in more than 10 schools, you can only list 10 at a time, but then you can go back in at any time and you can update that information. So you can update the school list at any time. So just because you listed these 10 doesn't mean that next week you can't go in and change it. You can add schools, delete schools whenever you need. I do recommend making sure that the top school that you list is the top school you're interested in. And just note that FIA, so we at FIA, we only get that top school that's listed. So we see that comes through to us, and that's the school on our end that's going to receive FIA state grant information. So once you officially decide where you want to attend for students, once you decide if it's not that top school that you listed, maybe you change your mind or there's different schools better, you would just contact FIA. You just call or you go online and you can update your school. It's very quick, takes just a few minutes, and then you'll be good to go. So just that's another thing, keep back in the back of your mind. If you do, once you make up, decide where that perfect school is for you, you make that decision, just make sure you notify FIA so that we have the correct school on file. After school information, it will take you to a couple dependency questions. So it's going to ask the student some questions to determine if they are a dependent or an independent student. So it'll ask about their age. Are you 24 or older? Are you married? Are you a veteran? Are you working on a graduate level degree? Are you emancipated minor, etc. As you go through, if you're not checking any of those boxes, so if none of them apply to you as the student, then in FAFSA's eyes, you are a dependent student, which means you have to include parents' information. If you do check yes to any of these, maybe you were in foster care, and you're 13 years or older, if you're in foster care, maybe you do check that. Then what that would mean is that you're an independent student. You won't have to enter parent information. However, the schools that you're applying for, the financial aid offices will be reaching out. They do have to verify that you're an independent student. So they're going to request documentation to prove your independent status. And you might, depending on how you answer questions, you might receive information from FIA as well, asking you to verify that information. So just, be ready if you have court documentation or paperwork or anything. You just might have to make sure you have copies of those on file to send to the schools, because each school will need that information as well as FIA. So say you don't check any of those boxes, so you're a dependent student in FAFSA's eyes. Well, then how do you determine what parent to list on the FAFSA? Sometimes this can get tricky, right? So here's kind of a simplified version of how to decide what parent to list. So if parents are married and they live together, you would list both parents on the FAFSA. If you have biological parents that live together but they're not married, again, you'd list both of those parents on the FAFSA. If you have adoptive parents, again, you would list them on the FAFSA. In the case where there's two parents in the household, only one needs to create the FSA ID account, and that is the parent that would electronically sign the FAFSA. So both parents in those situations don't need to have an account, just one parent, and that would be the parent that would electronically sign the FAFSA at the end. If you have divorced or separated parents, FAFSA asks that in this situation that you use the parent that you lived with the most over the past 12 months from the day you file. So students, the day you sit down to do the FAFSA, who did you live with the most over the past 12 months? Whatever parent that is the parent you would list on the FAFSA. Now, if it's a 50-50 even split, it's completely even. In that situation, then what you would do is you would then, FAFSA is going to want you to think back, okay, well, who provided the most support for you over the past 12 months, again, from the day you're filing the FAFSA. So again, you're sitting down to do the FAFSA, you live with parents even split, then it comes down to who provided the most support, so over 50% of your support. Support being financial support, so that would be, health insurance, medical bills, clothing, school supplies, food, etc. So you'd have to try to figure out who provided the most support, and then that would be the parent that you would list on the FAFSA. If that parent is remarried, then you would also have to list your step-parent, so your parent's spouse, on the FAFSA and their tax information and asset information. I get this every time, but a parent will say, well, I wasn't married in 2019. You're asking about 2019 tax information, but I'm married now. What do I do? The FAFSA wants you to list parents as of the day you're filing the FAFSA. So if your parent got remarried today and you're doing the FAFSA October 1st, then you would still list them and their spouse. And even though they didn't file together in 2019, you would then have to list both of their income information. So you'd have to total the income information and list that onto the FAFSA. I know that gets a little tricky, so if you have questions, you can always call me afterwards too, anytime, and we can try to talk through it, and I can help you figure out who to list. If you have foster parents, legal guardians, etc., they would not be listed on the FAFSA. If you live with anyone other than those on the left-hand side, the yes column, you wouldn't list them. So say you live with grandparents or an aunt or an uncle, they would not be listed as your parent on the FAFSA, and we get that a lot too. I've seen it happen. I worked with a financial aid office previously to this position, and students would list their grandparents because that's who they lived with. It always caused issues, so don't list anyone who's not on that yes column. So after you list the parent information, it will bring you to the financial information. However, before you start, it will give you the option to use the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, or the DRT. The DRT automatically, if you use it, will transfer your tax information directly from the IRS right onto the FAFSA. So it takes that tax information right from your 2019 tax return, puts it right onto the FAFSA, and makes it so much easier. It skips about probably 20 questions or so for you that you won't have to complete because it'll be automatically answered for you. If you can use the data retrieval tool, I suggest everyone does it. Like I said, it does make it easier, and that way you know that the information is correct. In order to use the data retrieval tool, it will take you to the IRS website. It's going to verify that your name, because at that point, actually, it will ask parents if they have to log in with their SSA ID account at that point. So if you want to use the data retrieval tool, you would log in with that SSA ID account. It's going to match your name, your social security number, your date of birth, etc. from that account and match it with the IRS database. So as long as that information matches, it will take you to the IRS website. And on the website, you'll have to put in your address as it appears exactly as it is on your 2019 tax return. So that's why even if you're going to use the data retrieval tool, I still recommend having the tax return right in front of you. That way you can put the address exactly as it appears. If you spelled out the word drive, then when you're importing your address, you have to make sure you spell out the word drive. It's very picky. So again, even if you think, oh, I'm going to use the data retrieval tool, still have your tax return on you. It'll just save you a headache. There are some exceptions where people can't use the data retrieval tool. If there was any sort of identity theft in the past, it won't let you use it. If your marital status on the FAFSA doesn't match your filing status, it won't let you use the data retrieval tool. So say in the example of you weren't married in 2019, but you are now, the FAFSA says you're married, but maybe you filed head of household in 2019. It doesn't match up, So it won't let you use the data retrieval tool in that case because you have to manually add up that information yourself. If you have questions manually adding the information, that's what I'm here for. I can help. You can call me. I can make sure you're looking at the correct information. I did get a question about child support. There's a specific question on the FAFSA it'll ask if you paid child support, and then it will also ask if you received any child support, and it'll tell you. I believe that information comes directly from the IRS if you use the data retrieval tool, so it should automatically answer that question. But if it doesn't, then it'll tell you there's like these little question marks that you can click on, and it'll bring up exactly where to look to see how much child support you received and or paid in 2019. But again, that child support information is based on 2019, not currently. So that's when it gets a little bit tricky because, like I said, the tax information is 2019, child support would be 2019, but asset information, cash, checking, savings, investments, etc., is as of the day you file the FAFSA. So again, it does get a little bit tricky, and I can help if you have questions throughout that process. So then you'll go and you'll enter student income information if they have any. They also have the option to use the data retrieval tool if they file taxes. You get through the financial information for students, and then it'll bring you to the signing page. The student, and like I said, one parent will have to electronically sign using their FSA ID accounts. All you do is you click provide student signature. The student already logged in, right, to get onto the FAFSA. So since they've already logged in, it'll just have a button for them to click to say sign. Then it'll bring you back to this page. You'll click provide parent signature. If the parent already logged in to use the data retrieval tool, again, it'll just show you the sign button. You click that and you'll be good to go. If they haven't already logged in, it will ask them to log in. And then if you do have any issues or you can't create an account for some reason, there is an option where you can print a signature page. So you have to print off the page. You have to sign it by hand, and then you'd mail it to the FAFSA. Within a few weeks, they'd have it updated, and you'd be good to go. Make sure that you don't submit the FAFSA until you've signed it. It will let you, I don't know why, but it does let you submit it without the signatures, and then it will come back as rejected. So you'll think, oh, I'm good to go, but on the school's ends of things, it will say that it's rejected, and you'll get some emails from FAFSA saying you have to go back on and resubmit information. If you can't complete the FAFSA in one step, in the beginning, it asks you to create a save key. The save key, it saves in the system that FAFSA. If you don't submit it, it'll save it for 45 days. You can go back in, you can make edits, you can make updates, you can do whatever you need to do until you're ready to submit it. So just make sure that you remember that save key. That's why it asks you for that, because if you can't complete the FAFSA in one sitting, you just hit the button save. When you go back on, you'll enter in your save key and it'll bring you right back to where you left off, and then you can submit the FAFSA at any time. So don't worry, if you get all the way through and then you realize you can't finish it that day, it's okay, you can totally save it and come back to it. Now after you've submitted it though, you will get taken to this confirmation page. The confirmation page will just show that you've submitted everything, and then there is at the bottom a link. If you're a PA resident, there's going to be a link that takes you to the state grant application. If you see this link, you'll click on it. It'll bring you right to FIA's website where you can complete the state grant application. You only have to complete this one time. So you'll do the FAFSA every year, but the state grant application is just for the first time. Students have to complete it. Since we use a lot of the same information as on the FAFSA, ours is really short. Our application is just a few quick questions. And like I said, you just complete that one time. If you X out of this page or you don't see the link and you forget about it, you'll receive an email from FIA. It's usually within a week. It'll go right to the student's email address that they use for their FSA ID account. You'll receive an email, and it will have it'll have a hyperlink in there that will take you to FIA's website for you to complete the application that way. You can also go to FIA.org after a few days, and you can complete the application if you have issues. So don't worry, it's not the end of the world if you don't see that link or you forget about it. Happens every time because it's at the bottom of the screen. You're so happy that you're done with the FAFSA, you're not even thinking, right? You're just like, woohoo, I'm done, X out, and then you're like, oh, wait, forgot about the state grant application. But don't worry, FIA will email you with instructions to the student about how to complete the state grant application at that point. Other forms you may need to complete. Check with your schools. They may require the College Scholarship Service profile, the CSS profile, or they may have college-specific forms that they require as well. So check with the schools to see if you're required to submit that. The College Scholarship Service profile, CSS profile, is through the College Board. Only about 400 colleges and universities across the U.S. require this. So you'd only have to submit this if the school that you're applying for requires it. So not everyone will need to complete this step. This does not replace the FAFSA. This is done in addition to the FAFSA. So you would do the FAFSA and the CSS profile if it's required. If you go to the College Board website at the bottom, I think there's a list of schools on the website that tell you what schools require this. It will also be on the school's website. So if you're checking out the school's website, you'll see if they're requiring it. It'll be all over the place with deadlines and whatnot about if they're requiring it. It does cost money to complete. So again, only do it if you're required to based on the schools you're applying for. So after filing, your information will be shared with FIA and all of the colleges you list on the FAFSA. Then a few days after that, you will receive an email confirmation with your student aid report or your SAR report. This is basically a regurgitated FAFSA. I encourage everyone, go through that SAR report, verify that everything you entered on the FAFSA is correct. Maybe a couple of days later, you're reading over that and you realize, oh, I forgot to enter this, or that's not correct. That was something that I didn't mean to enter. This is the perfect way to check that, just to make sure that everything's correct. If it is, at this point, it's basically a waiting game because schools are going to start receiving that FAFSA information, and they all process that at different times on different timelines. They send out the offer letters that, some send them out as early as November, December. Others might not send those out until February, March. So it is a waiting game. So that's why I think the best thing to do is check that SAR report, make sure it's correct, and then just be patient. Be checking your emails to make sure if you receive any emails, you know what you need to do and you're prepared. But really, it is just going to be a waiting game until you get all of the financial aid offers from the schools you're interested in. I do want to note if things have changed. So if there was a change with income or something with your household size, etc., drastic change from 2019 to how it is now, there is a special circumstance review process. Now, not all schools participate. It's not required that they do, but some schools are willing and able, and they will go in and they will update your FAFSA to make sure that it reflects your current situation. Now, only schools can do this. And again, they all have their own timelines of when they start this process, what's required for you to submit. So if there's a situation, maybe income is completely different now than it was in 2019, that's over a year ago. If that's the case, reach out to the schools you're interested in applying for. Just check with them to see if they complete a special circumstance review, and if they do, what you're needed to submit, when you have to submit that information, when they'll start processing it, etc., just to get a good idea. I did get a question, how hard is it to make that correction if you see a mistake on the SAR? Not hard at all. All you would do is you'd log back onto the FAFSA. Student would log into their FAFSA, the 21-22 FAFSA. You would click over till you get to the section that you need to update, make that change, and then make sure you go back to the submit section. Depending on the change, if it's something that has to do with the parents, usually it will make the parent re-sign the FAFSA. So the parent would have to sign in with their FSA ID account, electronically sign it, and then you can hit submit. So it's pretty quick and easy. Just takes a few minutes if you're making a change. The CSS completion process, it is similar to FAFSA, but usually they're asking a little bit more in depth of questions just to get a gauge of your finances. And every school can select, I believe it's school specific, so they can select what kinds of questions they are asking. So depending on the school, it may be easier or shorter, depending on what kinds of questions they're getting at. But that's how schools use that for institutional scholarships. So they're really trying to get a gauge of your, financial situation to determine scholarship eligibility. So It's up to the schools what kinds of questions are getting answered, but it is pretty, I would think, pretty similar to FAFSA. I haven't ever had to complete it, and I haven't helped a student complete it before, but I've heard from other families that it hasn't been too stressful of a process to complete the CSS profile. Yes, if you make a change to FAFSA, you will then, a week or so after that, get another email with the updated SAR report that shows the changes that you made. And any school listed on the FAFSA will also get an updated FAFSA. So at that point, they will see your new, adjusted FAFSA with the new information. All right, so once you submit all of that information on the FAFSA, there's tons of questions that you're going to go through and you're going to answer. All of those questions get calculated into this huge calculation that gives the FAFSA one number. So all of that information is calculated into this one number, and that's called the EFC. That is the expected family contribution. In FAFSA's eyes, that is how much the family and student should be able to contribute to the cost of higher education. However, this number does not mean that's how much you're going to have to pay, how much you're going to owe. I've had parents, when I worked in financial aid offices, call me and be like, Amy, this EFC is ridiculously high. How could they ever think that I'm going to have to pay that amount? Again, I don't know. This calculation just gives a general idea, but again, it's not how much you're going to have to pay. It's not how much you will owe. It's not linked to that at all. All the EFC does is tell the schools if you're eligible for a Pell Grant, and if so, how much of a Pell Grant you will receive, and it helps them calculate your financial need. So in order to calculate the financial need, they take the cost of attendance. So every school has a different cost of attendance, and that is basically the average cost to attend for the year, and that includes, tuition, fees, room, board, books, supplies, etc. It takes the cost of attendance minus the EFC. Now your EFC stays the same no matter where you go to school. It's the same number no matter where. And then the difference gives them your financial need. Your financial need is used to determine your eligibility for work study and for federal student loans. So it's important to know, like I said, EFC is the same no matter where you go to school, but because the costs are different, your financial need might be higher or lower depending on where you're attending school. Now with that, like I said, EFC is used to determine eligibility for the Pell Grant. So for this current year, the maximum Pell Grant amount is $6,345 for the year. So this would be for anyone who has a 0 EFC, which is the lowest EFC possible. If you have a 0 EFC and you're a full-time student, you would receive $6,345 for the year, no matter where you go to school. So whether you go to the community college down the street or you go to a private school in California, that Pell Grant amount will be the same amount. In order to receive a Pell Grant, the maximum EFC that you can have is around $5,700, and the Pell Grant itself could range anywhere from about $6,300 down to $300 for the year. So it's on a scale. So depending on what your EFC is, that's going to determine your Pell Grant amount anywhere from $6,300 down to $300 for the year. Now, like I said, the financial need calculation determines eligibility for federal work study. Federal work study is a program. When you complete the FAFSA, it will ask if you want to be considered for it. I suggest everyone says yes, even if you're not sure. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean that you'll have to have a work study job or you're going to be required to work or anything like that. But work study just means that you're eligible to apply for a work study position on campus. These positions are usually really competitive because there's not enough to go around, so they're usually pretty competitive programs, so you have to apply early. If you receive a position, schools might have a cap about how many hours a week you can work or what the pay scale is, but then you would just get a paycheck, every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, whatever it is, for the hours that you work. And then that's your paycheck as the student to do whatever you want with it. So it's just like an off-campus job. But typically with the work study positions, since they're on campus, they're understanding that you're a student, so it's a little bit usually more flexible than an off-campus position might be. So I do recommend just put that you're interested, and then once you start talking to financial aid, see what the process is, what positions there are that are available, you can determine if that's the right fit for you or not. There is a federal supplemental educational opportunity grant. I call it the SEOG grant. This is another federal grant. It is for students who are Pell eligible only, would qualify. Schools receive a pot of money for their SEOG grants. It's theirs to award how they would please, the only caveat being that the student has to be Pell eligible. Typically, though, they do award that based on a financial need calculation. So again, financial need would get calculated into that to determine if you're eligible. And then the amounts do vary. Some schools have a bigger pot. Some schools might not have as big of a pot. The awards cannot exceed more than $4,000, but it depends on the school. My previous school, no one really ever received more than $500 in an SEOG grant. So it just depends on the school and how they determine who they want to award that money to and how, in terms of the values. Now, we got this question earlier about the PA State grant. So I do want to point out, so the PA State grant is for any PA resident who's attending school in Pennsylvania. However, if you do attend school out of state, if it is one of the states on the screen, so Delaware, DC, Massachusetts, Ohio, Vermont, or West Virginia, those are our reciprocal states. So at FIA, we have a reciprocal agreement with those states where if we have a student from Pennsylvania who attends school in those states, that we can still award them a state grant. So we can still give them a state grant. However, the grant amounts are lower for our reciprocal state students. So if you're attending schools in a reciprocal state, the maximum award you can receive is $578 if you're not a veteran. So that's for the year. Versus if you look on the screen, depending on the cost tier of the school that you're attending, so depending on the cost of attendance, the maximum awards do fluctuate. So we're not like the Pell Grant. It's not a set amount no matter where you go to school. The cost could be a little bit higher if the costs are higher for your school. It just depends. And then the minimum award, no matter where you attend, would be $500 if you're eligible. More students are eligible for the state grant than the Pell Grant. So I have, parents tell me, oh, I won't qualify for the Pell Grant, but maybe you do qualify for the state grant. Like I said, more students do qualify for the state grant than the Pell Grant. And then the schools will estimate roughly how much you might receive. Typically in June, beginning of June or so, our final FIA awards come out, and that's when we notify families and students how much they will be receiving. So that will be the final award amount at that point. Now we do, like I said, we do have other state programs. Our state grant is just the most popular program, but there are other programs as well. We have our own state work study program. We have a blind or deaf beneficiary grant. We have a foster ed tuition waiver, a Ready to Succeed scholarship, and more. So you can go to FIA.org. You can check out all of these special programs. Some of them have their own applications, so you'd have to apply. The one that I like to point out is the Ready to Succeed scholarship. This does not have its own application process. This is for students who typically don't qualify for the state grant, but have a family income of less than $110,000 for the year. If the student has, I believe it's 24 or more credits, so typically they're a sophomore, and then they have to have a 3.25 cumulative GPA. If they meet all of those requirements and the school participates in our Ready to Succeed program, schools would go on in the fall and they would just nominate students that are eligible. They would nominate the students, and then FIA would go through, select the students that they're going to award the grant to, and then you can receive that. It's $2,000 for the year. You can receive it multiple years in a row. At my previous institution, we would nominate probably around maybe 80 or so students, and I think we had, 12 to 15 or so that were selected. It is typically on a first-come, first-served basis, so again, it's really good to get your FAFSA completed as early as possible. And it's just another program, right, where I have families who say, I'm not going to qualify for the state grant, I'm not going to qualify for Pell Grant, so I'm just going to do the FAFSA whenever. This is why it's important every year. Still make sure you do the FAFSA by May 1st, because you may qualify for other programs that you don't even know about, but because you're missing the deadline, you don't receive that money. So then the other thing when you complete the FAFSA, like I mentioned earlier, are federal loans. So federal student loans. All students are eligible to receive federal loans as long as they're a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. And it doesn't matter how much a parent makes or anything like that. All students can receive a federal student loan. These loans are in the student's name, not linked to the parent at all. There's no credit check process. There's no check of debt to income ratio or anything like that. They have a fixed interest rate. They have no payments required while the student's in school and for the 6 months after they graduate. And then there are two different types of federal student loans. The first being a federal subsidized loan or a sub loan. The second is a federal unsubsidized loan or an unsub loan. The difference is that the subsidized loan is based on financial need. So again, that calculation, cost minus EFC equals financial need. If there's leftover, if there's financial need left, the student can qualify for a federal subsidized loan. And the difference is the subsidized loan, the government pays the interest on that loan while the student's in school. So if they borrow a set amount their first year, when they graduate, they have 6 months, and once that loan kicks into repayment, it will still be the same amount. It wouldn't have gotten any larger. The unsubsidized loan is not need-based. Anyone can qualify, but the interest does accrue while the student's in school and in their grace period of 6 months. So any interest not paid during that period while the interest is accruing will be capitalized at the start of repayment. Both of these loans do have about a 1% origination fee that gets deducted right from the top that the government uses for processing. It's 1%. Most people honestly barely even notice. The amounts that students can borrow is dependent on their credits, right? What year they are. So as a first-year student, the maximum student loan that you can borrow is $5,500 for the year. If you qualify for a federal subsidized loan, the maximum sub loan that you can receive is $3,500 for the year, meaning you would receive a $3,500 subsidized loan and then a $2,000 unsubsidized loan, totaling $5,500. Maybe you don't qualify for the full $3,500 amount. Maybe you only qualify for $3,000. Then you would receive a $3,000 subsidized loan and then a $2,500 unsub loan. Or maybe you don't qualify at all for a subsidized loan. Then the full $5,500 would be given to you in an unsubsidized loan. Now, just because you complete the FAFSA, that does not mean you are accepting these loans. Okay, that just means that you could be eligible for these loans. In order to actually accept these loans, you will have to accept them usually through your school's portal online. You have to accept them online. And then there are 2 federal steps that students have to complete in order for the loans to pay in the fall. Typically, you do it over the summer. The first is entrance counseling. The second is a master promissory note, and that's the student's loan agreement. So without completing those 2 steps, your loans will never pay, okay? So I have parents all the time who are like, well, what if we don't want the loans? What do we do? Well, don't worry. Unless you accept those loans aren't going to pay. They're not going to be accepted for you. So it will be the student's decision if they want to accept, reduce, or decline that loan. As a second year, the loan increases. It goes up to $6,500. And then for third and fourth year, it goes up to $7,500. The total maximum amount that any undergrad dependent student can borrow is $31,000 total. So that means if you borrow the maximum your first, second, third, and fourth year, that would bring you up to $2,700, which would only give you an extra $4,000 if you stayed for an extra semester or an extra year. So I do like to tell families that because that's something that most of the time you never know unless it happens. So just keep that in mind. If you have to stay an extra semester, an extra year, you'll only be left with $4,000 if you borrow the maximum each year. Okay, I did get a question before we go on to step 4. Do you suggest completing the FAFSA prior to knowing school acceptance or the school that he will matriculate to? Yes. I honestly suggest doing the FAFSA next month or in November sometime. Typically, you won't know about acceptance that early unless maybe you're doing early decision. So I definitely do suggest to do the FAFSA and list any school. Like even if you're not sure that you're going to apply to that school, you can still list them on it. All that is going to do is it's going to send them your financial information. They're not going to do anything with that financial information except generate a financial aid offer, which is what we're going to talk about right now. So those financial aid offers, like I said, there's no set format. They can include any type of information. Some are going to put on their federal loans. Some won't even include federal loans. Some, if you're eligible for a scholarship, we'll talk about the requirements for those scholarships. Are they renewable? Is it just a one-time thing? Are there requirements that you have to meet every year in order to maintain that scholarship, such as a GPA? They're going to list any grants that you're eligible for, so it's important to understand, do you know what a grant is versus a loan? Some are going to list their cost of attendance. Now, like I said, cost of attendance is indirect and direct costs. So that includes tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, which aren't charged to the school because it's up to the student to find those typically, transportation costs such as gas or parking, miscellaneous living expenses, etc. So the cost of attendance is higher than what you're actually going to get billed for the university. Some schools and universities prefer to use the cost of attendance when talking about the cost because they want you to be prepared for costs such as books and supplies, parking, transportation, etc. They want you to get a full idea of how much you're going to be spending for that year, even if it's not something that's billed from the school. Others might only include their actual direct billed costs. So they might only include the tuition and fees, and if you're planning to live on campus, room and board. So when you're comparing these letters, you want to make sure that you're comparing, apples to apples, right? That you're looking at cost of attendance versus cost of attendance, or billed cost versus billed cost, because one school having billed costs, one school having cost of attendance is a completely different number. It could be a couple of $1,000 difference. So again, it's really important to be comparing the correct things. This is that helpful checklist that I mentioned. So in reviewing these notifications, just some questions that you could be asking yourself, again, to make sure that you're fully understanding what these letters are mentioning, what requirements there are, anything like that. So it's important, have this, when you start comparing the letters, have it right next to you, or kind of have that as a mental check to be sure that you're really understanding what you're reading with these letters. And then step 5, be sure you have the money you need, right? So if you have that financial aid offer from the school that you've decided, it has your cost, it has minus your aid, and it tells you roughly how much you're going to owe for the year. Well, what are you going to do if you have a gap, right? So what are you going to do with the money that you still owe that financial aid doesn't cover? So the main 2 options that we see families go with, the first being a Federal Direct Plus loan. This is the Parent Plus loan. So these loans are in the parent's name. It does require a credit check. It works very similarly to a federal unsubsidized loan. It has a fixed interest rate. You can select to have payments deferred while the student's in school, and you can select up to a 6-month grace period. Oh, I forgot to mention, the federal subsidized and unsubsidized loan, like I said, it has a fixed interest rate. This current year right now for students that are in college, the rate is 2.75%. That's the lowest that rate has been since probably before I even knew what loans were. This Parent Plus loan, the fixed interest rate this year is 5.3%. Again, that's very low compared to many years in the past, but these rates do change every year on July 1st. So next July 21, the interest rate will be updated, and that will be the interest rate for the life of the loan if you accept that loan. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And one thing to know with the Parent Plus loan, it's one of those fine print things that most people don't tell you until you've already applied for the loan, is there is an origination fee just like the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. However, it's more. Instead of 1%, it's about 4.2%, meaning if you borrowed a $10,000 loan, $424 would come right off the top for origination and processing. You would never see that money, and you'd be paying interest on that origination fee. So it's just, again, one thing to know is just because you owe, let's say, $2,000, borrowing a $2,000 plus loan will not cover that full balance. There will still be a balance owed because of those origination fees. If you have questions, I can help you with that. The thing with the plus loans, I had someone ask me in my last presentation, well, then why would people go with the plus loans with that origination fee? The reason is the plus loans are typically easier to get approved for. They don't do as much, they're not checking your credit and your debt to income ratio as much as they're checking for adverse credit or bad credit. So it is easier to get approved for a Parent Plus loan than it is the next option, which is the private alternative loan. I do want to mention in the Parent Plus loan case, if you apply for the Parent Plus loan and you are denied, the schools can offer the student an additional $4,000 unsubsidized loan. So if you are worried that you might not be approved, you could apply for that. It's too early. You wouldn't do that until next summer. But you could apply to that to see if you're approved or denied, because if you are denied, the student could receive an additional unsubsidized loan of $4,000 for the year. Now, private alternative loans are going to come from private lenders or financial institutions. You know, typical banks, most of them offer educational loans. These are typically in the student's name, but 99% of them require a co-signer or a co-borrower. It's usually based on the co-signer or co-borrower's credit and credit score, credit history, etc., what the interest rates are going to be. If you choose a variable versus a fixed rate, and depending on what type of repayment plan you choose, that can also impact the interest rate that the bank will offer you. So it's very important to read the fine print with these, to double check, make sure you fully understand what all of the ins and outs are, what the requirements are, what it looks like after the student graduates, what repayment plans there are, etc. And I do want to mention, like I said earlier, FIA does have our own private alternative loan, which is a new thing that we started doing. It's called the PA Forward. It's just like the other private alternative loans, but it's just another option now for families to check out. I would never want you to take out a loan with a high interest rate. So if you tried with Pay Forward and they were giving you a high interest rate, I would tell you to try somewhere else. I don't want you to choose whatever is most convenient. I want you to choose whatever is going to give you the best rate. So, this is going to be a lot on the families. You could contact financial aid offices. Usually they can't really give you any suggestions. They could maybe say some of the ones that they've seen in the past, but typically they can't tell you which one to go with. So it is going to be on you to do the research, to take a look and see what the different lenders are offering, what the different, fine print looks like, and pick which one would be best for you. So what can you do now? You can start that FSA ID process for students and parents, visit college websites to make sure you're understanding any of the deadlines that are out there. You can talk about what's affordable. Have those conversations, parents. Be honest, be upfront with your students about what you can and can't afford and what that's going to look like. Use net price calculators and explore scholarships. Net price calculators are really helpful. What that does is that's going to ask for some general information to give you an idea of what other students with the same situation, what type of aid they received, to give you an idea of how much you might actually have to pay out of pocket now, so that if you do end up having to wait until maybe February to receive financial aid offers, you have somewhat of an idea now. You don't have to wait until next year. Some schools have their own net price calculators right on their website, and others use general ones that are out online. So if you search for net price calculators, there are so many different ones to choose from. I was a math major in undergrad. I'm all about numbers, and I think the biggest thing, I like to talk about this every time, is return on investment. Higher education costs are increasing, right? We hear this all the time, how expensive it is to attend higher education to get a degree. So you want to make sure that you are getting an investment on that money. And what does that look like? So, for example, Georgetown University released a list of, I think it's like 4,500 schools and their return on investment to show what students who graduated from that school, what type of, how much money they earned within 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, etc. it's important to start thinking about that. And one thing that helps is thinking about your academic major choice. Is that a realistic choice? How much might you make after you graduate? And is that enough to pay back your loans? What's your expected salary? What's the demands of your field based on where you think you might want to live? One thing that can help students now to start thinking about that is mysmartborrowing.org. It's an interactive tool. It gets students to start thinking about their major and what careers there might be out there, what the demand for those careers look like, average salaries for entry-level positions, etc. So this can just be something good to get you to start thinking about that. Ways to reduce the need for financial aid: graduate on time. Like I said, your student loan eligibility will run out if you stay an extra semester, an extra year. The FIA grant, the state grant, you can only receive up to 8 semesters full-time, so 4 years. So again, if you stay an extra semester, you won't be able to receive a FIA state grant. Research the right major. Make sure you understand what it's going to look like when you graduate and if you can truly afford the loans that you have to take out. Earn college credits in high school or take AP classes if that's an option. 2+2 or 3+2 strategies where you can go to community college for 2 years and then another college to graduate in 4, or maybe you go to a college that offers a bachelor's and master's in 5 years, which will allow you to potentially save on a year's worth of savings. Consider commuting or leaving your car at home if you can. That can even save money on just parking and gas. Choose your meal plan carefully. Make sure you're picking a meal plan that you're going to use, because meals will disappear if you don't use them, and that's just money that's wasted. Buy used or rent textbooks. The used textbooks go quick, so if you wait until classes start, more than likely those books will be gone and you'll be stuck paying for the new textbooks. And on a side note, your campus store probably doesn't have the cheapest books, so look everywhere, look online, make sure you're really getting the best deal that you can that's out there. Use your resources. On the left-hand side are just some helpful resources that I've gone over today and a couple others. And then on the right-hand side are our scholarship links that we're not endorsing them at FIA, but we haven't really heard any bad things about them. So these are just sites that I've heard from students and families that they've used in the past, and it could just be a jumping off point for you to start looking for scholarships. Again, I will send this presentation out, so anyone who's attending will have this. So if you need it, you'll be able to get those links at a future time. Social media, FIA, we're out there on social media. We do different events on Fridays talking about financial aid and different programs that we have and ways to save. So if you want to follow us online. And then, like I said, my name is Amy Saudi. I'm the Access Partner for Allegheny County. So feel free to reach out or contact me if you have questions. So again, use that Q&A feature if there's something on your mind right now. If not, you can always call me, text me, email me if you need anything. And thank you so much for joining. So I really appreciate everyone giving me your time today.
Thank you so much, Amy. For everyone at home, this is Mrs. Girl, one of the high school counselors at Elizabeth Forward. Amy, that was fantastic information. You are so helpful. And just to reiterate, everyone at home, she is available. Mr. McManus and I are still available. It can be an overwhelming process, but please access your network, your resources, and know that we're here. If you could just stay on for a few more minutes, I won't take too much of your time, but I did want to talk about scholarships. So Elizabeth Forward's pretty blessed in that we have our own Elizabeth Forward Alumni Association, as most of you hopefully know by now. So I wanted to give you a couple tips to prepare for that. Although the window for application doesn't open until after Christmas, there are things you can do now to prepare yourself so that this doesn't add to the feeling of being overwhelmed while you're applying to the colleges and getting all of those things organized. So I'm going to put a link in the chat here, but also say it in case you're on your phone. efalumni.org is the website. So one of the, if I can get it in there. Not sure why it's sending, but efalumni.org is the website, and they have about 30 scholarships only for our seniors here at Elizabeth Forward, and it totals over $40,000. So you can go on there right now and look under the scholarship tab and have the A to Z list of every scholarship that they offer. Now, it's not all set in stone. I believe there may be 1 or 2 changes before they come out, but for the most part, the amount's going to be the same. The criteria to apply is going to be the same. There should be something for every single student. So if you're going to a trade school, there's 1 or 2 for you. If you're a traditional 4-year student, if you love community service, depending on the major, there is something truly for every single senior. So I hope that you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get those prepared, because every year we beg our students to apply and they think they don't have a good chance, and the truth is not a lot of students apply, so their chances are very good. So if you're here tonight, hopefully that's a good sign that you and your student are ready to commit to that. There's no limit on the amount that you can apply to. I will say that it is a myth. Every year a student asks, I hear you can only win 1. So they try to put their eggs all in one basket. And this will be my 5th year at Elizabeth Forward, but I find that not to be the case. So every year they go from the top down and give it to who they feel is deserving. And every time there tends to be 1 or 2 students that get multiple, because there was such a small pool of candidates, there ended up being only a single candidate for even if one of the smaller ones. So note that and start preparing and looking at those essays now, and getting your resume ready now. Also, if you exhaust looking at those and preparing for those, we have a wealth of other scholarships that you can find on our daily bulletin. We announce them on the morning announcements every day. We also have a drawer in our guidance department where your student is more than welcome to come by at any time and sift through the drawer. We keep a lot of our local and state ones there that come through Elizabeth Forward in that drawer. So if they have a study hall, they are more than welcome to come through and see what applies to them. On another note, I just wanted to say, since I have probably mostly seniors that I see attended, Mr. McManus and I normally come into the senior classrooms to help you guys prepare for the college and post-secondary planning. And this year, with the circumstances, we weren't able to come into the classrooms, but we were able to create a presentation with all of the same information. So I'm not sure if your students shared it with you, but on their attendance course, where they go in daily and log their attendance, right below it is a 45-minute presentation that should help your student with everything from narrowing their interest for college to how to, narrow down which college you feel might be a good fit for you, to the transcript process, the letter of recommendation process. So financial aid is really just one small piece of it, and we don't want you to feel lost or overwhelmed. We're still here to help. But I wanted to make sure you were aware of that, because there's a lot of helpful information on that video that if you just watch it might answer your questions ahead of time. Does anyone have any questions for me while we have it open? Feel free to put it in the chat. Again, that website is efalumni.org. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Amy. She put it in there. Ah, good. So any student can register for the SATs and ACTs. It doesn't have to be juniors or seniors. If you go to collegeboard.org, there are standardized test dates. So for Elizabeth Forward, we're not going to be hosting them until December. And for the ACTs, we're not going to be hosting them this year, but that doesn't mean that your student can't test. So I believe the upcoming November SATs, Bell Vernon, McKeesport, and I'm blanking on the third, but they're Ringgold. I believe those are the 3 closest districts that still have space to register for the SATs in November. Good question. And then ACTs would be the same process. So you would go to ACT.org, and when you go to register for the exam, you put in your zip code, and they'll give you whatever districts are hosting that standardized test on a Saturday throughout the year. All right, so I appreciate you guys joining us tonight. Amy, so much appreciate your time and all the information. We have, There you go. We have a great wealth of a resource here in Amy, so we're going to be sure to use you in the future and reach out to you if we need you. All right. I hope everyone has a wonderful